moving from a sedentary to a physically active societal way of life. This is...
Welcome to Up on Our Feet. Previously, we learned how, through research, physical activity shows that, or the research shows that physical activity positively impacts the brain, cognition. And for students, this means that physical activity can improve academic performance. We also learned that in the country of Finland, they value physical activity throughout their culture, and they include physical activity as an integral element in their school system, the public school system. In fact, at the elementary level, the primary school level, for every 45 minutes of academics classroom time, it's mandated that the students get 15 minutes of physical activity time outside. So we know that the research shows that physical activity positively impacts the brain, cognition, and academic performance. We know that in Finland, they have implemented this, and it has led in part to Finland always being in the top 10 of all the nations in the world in student academic performance. In fact, Finland has several times been #1 in the world. So if this works, if it shows up in the research and it shows up in Finland, is it possible that this could happen here in America? Well, in fact, it already has, and it's not anything new. Back in 1978, a teacher went to Meridian Elementary School just east of San Diego, California, and implemented a physical activity program that had outstanding academic and behavioral results for his students. And after 23 consecutive years of running the program there at Meridian, this teacher retired. But we are fortunate enough to have him here with us to describe the program, what he did, and the impact on his kids. Pete Saccone, nice to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Joel.
Okay, if you would, please tell us, what was the name of your program and how did it come about? What was its origins?
Okay, the name of the program initially was, and it always stayed, it's funners in quotes, to be a runner. The kids created that name the very first week of school after I had gotten them out onto the running field, and we started walking, and then eventually it became a walking and a running program. So for all those years I had it's funner to be a runner. It became so popular and so successful that the superintendent of my school district learned about it, came and actually ran with the kids a couple of times and asked me if I would consider, in addition to having it called It's Funner to Be a Runner, it includes something that would have academics in there. So I took that back to the kids and I told them the truth. I said, Superintendent so-and-so would like us to have another name in addition to It's Funner to Be a Runner. And I said, let's create a name. And I told him why he wanted academics in there, because we're saying that the running improves the academics in addition to improving the person in total self-esteem and all that. Well, they came up with FAST, fast, which was very appropriate considering it was running, even though our goal wasn't to run fast. And FAST stands for fitness, academics, and self-esteem training. That's how the names originated. The kids created It's Funner to Be a Runner, and then also created FAST. How did the program originate? Well, I had taught middle school for a few years, not many, and I had taught 1 year in Connecticut at the elementary level. And I just knew that I wasn't a physical education teacher, and I just knew at the elementary level, kids weren't getting physical education. They really weren't. Oh, they would be told, go out and they ran around, they did what kids do. Oftentimes got into trouble and that sort of thing. So I said, no, we've got to do something, because by law, we were supposed to teach physical education. Hate to say it, but it really wasn't being done at the elementary level, at least. So I just said to the kids, I told them how I was a runner, and I didn't say I was a good runner or anything. I said I was a runner. Running is good for us. It helps in many, many ways. And I said, why don't we give this a shot? We'll start right away. We'll just start by walking, and eventually those of you who want to run will run, and I'm never going to make you run. I promised them that. I said, but you will at least walk, because everybody can do that. Well, it became so successful. After a few weeks, the kids, most of them just took right into it. They would run and they would talk with each other. They would laugh. And of course, I ran with them. It wouldn't work if I didn't do that. And I walked with them. So it just took off. And before I knew it, every kid ran. Some did run and walk, because they were told that I would never make them run, but they had to always at least walk at a brisk pace. And if they did choose to walk, they had to walk by themselves, not as punishment, but I didn't want them encouraging. And they knew that. They knew me. I didn't want them to encourage kids who were running to say, that looks nice walking. Because, Joel, running's not easy. It takes effort. Anything in life that's worthwhile takes effort. But walking's wonderful, and running's terrific. And that's what happened. And then when I just knew that I could use the running in the classroom, in mathematics, social studies, you name it. We could take a map and we could see how many miles it is from Meridian Elementary in San Diego area to Connecticut. And we could map it out and then have a chart and say, we've gone from Meridian Elementary School, we're now in Arizona. And that kind of stuff. So I was able to integrate it into all areas of the curriculum. And that's where fitness, academics came in. And oh boy, did it help some of these kids, because first of all, and it wasn't an all day thing where I was able to integrate it, obviously, but wherever I could, I would integrate the running into the academics, and it made it so much more meaningful. The kids, for example, I'll give you a good example in math. Every morning, once we finished our run, the kids would come in. They had what we call the lap chart that they created, a simple piece of paper with 31 squares in it. And they would come in and they would be settling down. I'd be changing clothes. I had to change clothes, clean up just like they did. But we did it quickly. We did it efficiently. And while we were doing that, the kids would have that lap chart on their desk, and I'd say, okay, Johnny, how many did you do? And we'd just go down the rows, and they'd say 10, 12, however many laps they did. And I trusted them, and they knew that. And we made adjustments sometimes because maybe they forgot exactly. But 3 times around equaled 1 mile. And then they had to divide 3 into however many laps they did that morning. And that's how many miles they did. And at the end of the week, we just did the same thing for the whole week. How many laps, how many miles? That's just one simple example. And then I tried to integrate it wherever we could. And as soon as we went through that lap chart, which took a minute, literally, the kids knew the routine. They also had a piece of paper on their desk, a half sheet of paper, and I turned on classical music. And for 10 minutes, they wrote anything they wanted to write. I wasn't going to correct spelling. They knew that because it was a quick 10-minute write. Many of the kids would talk about the running they just did. Not always. Sometimes they wouldn't even mention it. They would talk about what they did the night before with their parents or what they were going to do next week. And so it was really interesting. And that, again, another example how I was able to integrate the running into the academics, even with that little 10-minute writing piece. And then every afternoon, as soon as they got in from lunch break, they would sit down, I turn on the music again, and they would read for maybe 20, 25 minutes, whatever I needed. And I would have that stack of 10-minute writing papers, and I would read them. And I would say, oh, great job, Joey, or Carol, what a terrific job you did on the field today. You're doing so well. Or whatever they talked about, I would kind of say something. And then they would get that the next day. They'd read my little comments. And I told them, never throw these 10-minute papers away. Put them in, I gave them each a folder, put them in a folder. I said, because someday down the road, you're going to be 10 years older. Somebody's going to say, here, mom might say to you, here's this folder that you had in 5th grade with Mr. Saccone. And you'll read those and it'll bring back such terrific memories. And you know, just recently, and this doesn't happen a lot, but every so often I get a phone call from a kid. Just the other day, recently, a couple of weeks ago, I get a call from so-and-so saying, you might not remember me, but I was in your 5th grade class in such and such a year. And I have those papers that you told us to save. And I just wanted to call you and tell you what a great year that I had, that type thing. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I can't even remember quite exactly what you asked, but that's how it started. And it just went on from there. It just became routine. The kids knew what to expect. They knew they didn't have to run, but believe me when I tell you, the very high majority of the kids ran all the time. But if they were having a bad day, they would just walk alone. I tried to encourage them to walk briskly. And remember, I wasn't on just looking. I was out there. And we never ran with 30 kids at the same time. That's how many kids I typically had. I would run, just keep running. And I would run with I made it a point to be with every single kid every morning, even if it was one lap. Some kids stayed with me the whole time, and I never pushed them. So I got to know the kids. They got to know me. They got to know each other, and they were proud of each other. You'd be amazed. To this day, I remember I'd be running with so-and-so, and we'd be going by one of the kids who you can tell was having a tough morning. And the other kids would say, come on, you're doing great. So it just was wonderful. They cared for each other.
So I know the program, and you had mentioned this when we talked before, it wasn't a before school program. It wasn't an after school program. It was the thing you did first thing every morning. What was the response of your administrators? Because I'm sure you had several principals over those 23 years. What was their response to you taking school time, especially the first 45, 50 minutes of the school day, to go out and run?
Not only did I have several, 5 or 6, I don't know how many principals in those 23 years, whatever it was, but I also had 3 or 4 superintendents. First thing I made it a point to do was meet with those principals. Every time there was a new one, I would sit down and explain what I do, because I knew what was going to happen. They were going to say, oh, especially because they were new, they wanted to look good, and they were saying, gee, that's a lot of time you're out there in the morning. Same thing as what you're asking. So I made it a point to, number one, talk with them. And then I explained it all. And I said, those 45 or so minutes will mean so much to those kids. And they'll do so well academically. And then, of course, as the years went on, not only was I able to say they will do well academically, I can only tell you, I would say to them, that every year I've been here, these kids have the greatest test scores. They're very successful. They don't get into trouble. They like each other. They're very, very successful kids. So, of course, I had that going for me after the first few years. Initially, I had to convince them a little more. So I would invite those principals to come out onto the running field and walk with us at least, do what the kids did. And I would also have them invite them into the classroom and talk to the kids about what they do on that running field. And they would come in and they would talk, and that would sell them. Then they knew. And I could go into a little more about it, but because there was some jealousy and different things, because it was new. I was new at the school, obviously the first year. And but it all worked well. And most of the teachers accepted me for what I was doing, especially because I never pushed it on them. Never would I ever say, you should be doing what I'm doing. No way, because they did a lot of things that maybe I should have been doing and I didn't. You know, I know that we can't do it all, is what I'm saying. But no, and administrators, I would invite the superintendent to come to and do the same, and they did. I have to give them credit. Every one of them would show up, and fortunately, a couple of them happened to be runners, so that was just perfect. I mean, that was literally perfect. And they would talk with the kids. The kids would run with them because we had all kinds of visitors because the program grew. It became very popular. So I'd get calls. Hey, can we come and see what you're doing? So of course I always said yes. And I said, feel free to run with the kids, talk with the kids, and of course come into the classroom when we're done and, you know, ask anything you want. So the kids were always like front and center. The kids had all kinds of people watching them and making them feel special. So yeah, the superintendents, they after a while, you know, we had a lot of people come, a lot of news people, news. We were on TV many times on the news programs. And how could a superintendent, what could the superintendent say? It made them look so good. Meridian Elementary became pretty popular within this Cajon Valley Union School District. It made that superintendent look pretty good. So now I was pretty good. I was in good terms with all those people.
What about how did the program impact the kids' behavior?
That's the easiest one to answer, because as you can imagine, 10 and 11-year-old kids, depending on what kind of a home life they've had, what kind of school life they've had, mainly what kind of success they've had. Kids who haven't had much success don't feel very good about themselves. They tend to try to make themselves feel good by acting out, by doing things they shouldn't be doing. So those kids, because maybe, see, I wasn't very athletic at all. I couldn't play baseball. I felt badly about it. I just wasn't good. But when I one day decided I was going to try running, not as a kid, I was in my 20s. And all of a sudden, I found something I could do. And maybe that's what really got me to get the kids into this. Because I remember so vividly, once I started running, I started entering races. And by the way, if you can put it in your memory there, ask me about on weekends what I did with these kids, about going to races, and I'll explain that. But all of a sudden, I knew I could run. And I remember when I started teaching, I knew I was going to come across kids with bad behavior, kids who haven't had any success, kids who weren't good at anything sports-wise, because a lot of people aren't, let's face it. But everybody could put one foot, and that's how I used to tell the kids. Everybody could put one foot in front of the other and walk briskly and or eventually run. Well, all of a sudden, many of those kids who I'm describing, they found, like I did, they found something that they could do. And it was amazing how their self-esteem just grew. They became confident. They made more friends because they could do something now that a lot of kids could never do. You know, they just couldn't do it unless they had somebody, I hate to say the way I did it, but because I encouraged them, they had somebody to encourage them to do something that they could do. And they became better academically, behavior-wise. Some of them went from night to day because they just all of a sudden they said, hey, I'm good at something. That's the best way I can answer it, Joel, because it's so accurate.
Okay, so you just mentioned not only it positively impacted them behaviorally, but academically. And I remember there was an article in California Educator, which is the monthly publication of the California Teachers Association. And in that article, it said that your fifth graders with the Funner to Be a Runner program for 23 consecutive years had the highest test scores in the school. Is that right?
correct. And of course, I had to be very careful with that, obviously, for obvious reasons. And I would always tell the kids how well they do, and I would never compare them to other classes at my school. But I would say, you guys do so much better than most kids who aren't doing this activity. That you do so much better academically, and of course, you're just nice kids. So yeah, I let them know. And yes, in answer to your question, that is pretty accurate what you mentioned. And by the way, not just Meridian Elementary School, we had very high test scores compared to most kids at that level.
Right. Okay. So with all these successes, what about other schools in your district and about other districts in the area? And with all the publicity you received that you were talking about, did they show any interest? Did any of them implement the program?
There was interest shown, but unfortunately, first of all, I'm going to say this in a very positive way. Teaching is not an easy thing to do. When you have all that responsibility, all those kids, especially what I had, meaning as most of the elementary teachers had, same kids all day long. We had to teach math, reading, writing, social studies, you name it, and everything else. And all of a sudden to say to a teacher, yes, this is what I've done. It's been very successful, as you have read or whatever, heard about it, seen on TV. But I happen to be a runner, and that's what made it work for me. If the teacher didn't participate with the kids, it would never work. And I found it very difficult to expect a teacher all of a sudden to say, hey, I'm going to become a runner and do this. I said, you could walk. But even that, a lot of teachers come to school, they're dressed a certain way. You can't go out. In El Cajon, where I was teaching, some days it'd be 80 degrees by 8 o'clock in the morning, 90 degrees even. And you couldn't expect a teacher to do what I did. I could never expect a teacher to do what I did. I never even came to school. I came to school with running shorts and a t-shirt. And I always had my clothes with me in my car. And I would take them into the classroom, hang them up. And the kids, many of them did the same thing. Or many of them just stayed the way they were all day. Because it's easy for a 10-year-old. But some kids, they knew they were totally okay to change. I wanted them to clean up. They knew that. That was a must. They had to go into the boys' room, girls' room, put water under their arms, wash their face. So yeah, but I couldn't expect a teacher to do what I'm just explaining to you. I couldn't do that. However, that didn't mean I couldn't tell them about what I was doing and let them make their decisions. And some of them did, in direct answer to your question. Not many, not really. So a lot of them tried, I'll say that. A lot of them made an attempt, and they would even write us and tell us what they've accomplished. And some of the teachers were pretty sharp. They would have their class send my class letters, which were always perfect, because we did a lot of that all the time anyway. So these kids in my class became very good letter writers. And I mean, if I got a packet of 30 letters or whatever, I'd hand one to each kid, and some kids would have to take 2. And they loved saying what we did, and they would talk to those other kids the way I'm talking with you right now. That's exactly what they would do. It was so cool to see them motivate other kids.
Okay. You were there at Meridian 23 years, highly successful, highest test scores in the school for 23 years, great behavior on the part of the kids. Once you retired in 2001, did the school continue the program?
No, I hate to say no, but I mean, again, I understand why they didn't, because there was no one who was going to do it, who was going to take my place. As I said, there were some teachers, I shouldn't say totally no, because I imagine, and in fact, not only do I imagine, I'm sure there were a couple of teachers after I retired who had worked with me with the program. They would be sure they would take their class out like they always did when I was there. But, it dwindled. It was real helpful for me to be out there with my class, and then my class would encourage their kids. And it just says, again, the teacher plays the biggest role, and I would be expecting too much of a teacher to do it because I did it. I could only encourage them and let them know the good parts of it. Even if they just took, I would say, even if you go out and walk with your class every day for 15 minutes, nothing like what we did, but it's better than nothing. So I did my best. And other school districts, I would get some letters and some teachers would contact me saying they had a program going while I was still teaching. Whether or not that continued, I can't answer it, of course. But I know at Meridian, no. It just eventually went away.
Okay. So with so many kids being sedentary today, especially with all the technology issues, and with the epidemic of childhood overweight and obesity, what do you think has to happen for programs like yours, similar to yours, to be implemented in the schools so the schools can, get great academic scores, improve the behavior of the kids, and improve their health? It just seems we're shooting ourselves in the foot. But what do you think it would take to make something like that happen?
I hate to answer it this way, but it would have to be mandated. In other words, the superintendent of schools in any given school district would maybe talk about the Finland situation that you mentioned that I'm looking forward to hearing more about. They would have to say, look, we need to do something, and all the research shows that fit kids are going to do better academically and they're going to be better behaved. So here's where it doesn't have to be a running program, maybe not even a walking program, although I can't think of anything better than running and walking. But walking would work if it was very brisk, but very organized, not just a bunch of kids out there, because kids will do anything they can, unfortunately, if they're not well supervised, some of them to create problems, and that gets infectious. So it would have to be mandated, it'd have to be highly structured, and the teachers, of course, would have to buy into it, and that, I'm concerned, is the biggest issue, because it's going to be pretty difficult to tell everyone who's in the teaching profession, and believe me, there are most, I'm sure, are wonderful teachers. They're terrific in science and far better than in many of the things that I ever was. But I did my best, and I was good enough at 5th grade. You can get by pretty much. But it's hard to say to a teacher, I want you every day to be out there for 45 minutes and at least walk with the kids. And if we have research, we have booklets, we have ways to do it. We'll have assemblies teaching you how to do it. But that's what would have to happen. Am I optimistic that it'll ever happen? No, I'm not, because I know what it would take. Some teachers, they want to come to school. They don't want to have to change clothes. It'll never work if the teacher doesn't participate. Never, ever, ever, ever. It can't. How would you tell a kid, I want you to do this, if you're not willing to do it? Can't do it. So I don't know what to say. And answer your question, somehow magically, or the way they do it in the middle school and the high schools, they actually have physical education specialists. And they come in, as you probably know all this, and they come in and they take those kids, but that might be once a week for a half hour or whatever. This has to be done daily to make it work. And that'll never happen because you can't have a specialist there every day with all the different classes. So it's a tough one. That's all I can say.
Okay. Final question. In the big picture of things, with all the years you did the program at Meridian Elementary, what did you learn from doing that program? What was the big takeaway you had after all those years of implementing It's Funner to Be a Runner?
That's an easy one for me to answer, because 20 years later or whatever it's been, I have the same image that I had the day I walked out of that building for the last time, and all those years that I did what I did, The kids were wonderful. The kids responded, but again, we're talking 10 and 11-year-old kids. I'm not sure what it would be like with older kids. Younger kids, it would work for sure, for sure. Because in fact, in many ways, the younger kids, it would be even easier because they're so willing to do what you want them to do. But direct answer to your question, I have the fondest memories. I smile when I think about what we accomplished. I smile about remembering certain kids who just didn't like themselves, but because they found one thing that they could do well, and that was the running, and that led to other things that they all of a sudden did well: math, reading, writing. Because I integrated all that stuff wherever I could into the classroom, and to see the success now. And then the other thing that brings a real smile on my face is how I remember kids who were doing well in all areas. They had good families, so of course that helped. They did well, and they would help these other kids because I stressed it so much how important it was to help each other. I said, because everybody in this classroom has something special to offer. And as bright as you might be, and how fortunate you might be because you have great family and all, somebody else has something that you don't have. And if everybody shares with each other, we're all going to be a great, great community. And that's what the kids did. They really took care of each other.
Okay. Pete Saccone, retired teacher from Meridian Elementary School. Thanks for being with us on Up on Our Feet.
Well, I certainly enjoyed being here, and it was a pleasure, in fact, to be here with you.